This took put back in the early 2000s. I'm a female and lived alone in my loft at the time. I was domestic by myself one night and gotten a phone call. I picked it up and replied, but to begin with didn't listen anything on the other conclusion. I inquired on the off chance that anyone was there, and for 1 or 2 seconds there was still nothing. At that point, at long last, a man talked. I did not recognize the voice as anyone that I knew. He said that he must have the off-base number, and after that he hung up. After that, I didn't think much of it. Every so often, phone calls for the off-base number were made. It was certainly a part more common than it is nowadays. So a couple of days went by, and after that once more, I got a call late at night. I picked up the phone saying hi, and I listened nothing. I said hi a few more times. No one talked on the other conclusion at all, and I was at that point hung up on by whoever had called me. The exceptionally following night after that, it happened once more. By presently, I was getting truly suspicious. I didn't know what was going on, but it was unusual that it kept happening. They would call, and I would reply, and after that they wouldn't say anything. It continuously appeared to happen afterward at night. It was truly inching me out, and I was pondering what was going on. I didn't get any more calls for the rest of that night, in spite of the fact that. The another interesting thing to happen was not a phone call. I cleared out for work the another morning after the past call. My drive to work as a rule took approximately 15 minutes. Presently I was taken after the complete way there. I know that since the road that my flat was on was truly calm. The following few boulevards that I would drive on were too more often than not calm, so I taken note a car driving behind me, in spite of the fact that I couldn't tell who was driving the car. When I have to be the throughway, I sort of overlooked approximately it, and figured that it wasn't reaching to take after me any longer. The interstate had a parcel more vehicles on it. I thought perhaps it was a coincidence to that point, when I took my exit for work. I taken note the car taking the exit behind me. I drove down a handful more roads, and the car did the same. This had never happened some time recently, and I had a very solid feeling that they were taking after me intentioned. Presently I was getting stressed, but actually right sometime recently my turn for work, the car went in another course. I truly didn't know what to think approximately it. After work that night, I drove back domestic and wasn't taken after. That night I didn't get any phone calls, but the exceptionally another night after that I did. This time I keep in mind that it was likely almost 11 o'clock. The phone rang and I strolled over and picked it up. After replying, I listened a man's voice. He told me that he was my neighbour down the corridor and inquired on the off chance that I may come over genuine speedy. He said he required a few help. Something about it there appeared fishy. I thought that I recognized the voice, but not as a neighbour. Additionally, I was lovely beyond any doubt that whoever this was assumed to be did not have my phone number. I went to the entryway and looked through my peephole out of interest. When I did, I saw a man standing right there on the other side. I was not beyond any doubt who he was, but I did think he was likely the one behind the bizarre events. So instead, I dialed 911 and told the police that there was a suspicious man at my flat. I at that point got another call from the fellow claiming to be my neighbour. I replied it, inquiring who this neighbour was. He made up a few title like Steve or something. I keep in mind he fair kept telling me to come out of my loft, which it was pressing. I went back over to the entryway and looked out, and the fellow was still there. I told him that I called the cops. When I said this, I watched him turn, and after that walk absent. After that, he didn't come back. The police got there a small whereas afterward, and I told them everything that the man had done. Unfortunately, there was not a part that they may do around it. I chosen to alter my phone number. In spite of the fact that after that I didn't get any more calls, I too wasn't taken after, and no one came to my flat. In spite of the fact that I, as it were, lived in that loft for almost another month, I never found out who had done it or why. Every time the phone would ring late at night for months, I would stress that it was that man calling. I'm truly happy that he didn't. Something truly unusual happened to me 1 or 2 of a long time prior. I got a modern cell phone and modern number. I had been requiring a modern phone for a whereas, and my past benefit was not exceptionally great. But after exchanging over, I before long begun to induce bizarre phone calls and ratings. The primary was a phone call from a number that I didn't recognize. Clearly, I didn't truly recognize any of the unused numbers after getting the phone, but when I replied, a man talked and inquired me why I hadn't been returning his calls. I realized that he must have the off-base number, and I told him that. But for a few unusual reasons, he didn't accept me. So after that, I fair hung up on him. But at some point afterward, I received a content message from a diverse number. This content said something like, "Hello, call me once you get the chance." Once more, I didn't know the number, and I answered inquiring who it was. They reacted with a title I didn't know, and I told them that they had the off-base number. This individual did not react. Over another week or so, I got at slightest 10 diverse content messages and likely 10 phone calls. Most of them were from diverse phone numbers, but a few were the same. I reacted to most of them saying, "off-base number." I realized that most likely the past individual to have my phone number must have not told their contacts that they changed numbers, and they must have had a part of companions or something. I replied another one of the irregular calls out of interest. There was another man who I didn't know, and I told him that he had the off-base number, and I had as of late gotten a modern one. The man on the other conclusion was saying that he didn't get it. I began to clarify to him that I got an unused phone and modern benefit, but he at that point hung up on me. I put up with irregular ratings and in some cases calls for the next few days. Nearly everything I fair begun disregarding. A few individuals, who I had as of now told they had the off-base number, proceeded to contact me. It was kind of irritating, and I indeed considered inquiring to alter numbers. At that point, I got a content from somebody who had as of now texted me numerous times. They said that I needed to cut the poo and no one was buying my unused number babble. At that point, they said something like my life may be made hopeless in the event that I didn't begin participating. I studied that, and I was considering to myself, who on earth had this number sometime recently, me? I didn't react, and wasn't truly beyond any doubt what to do. But I got in another content saying that they may discover me, and I couldn't stow away until the end of time. By this point, most of the debilitating ratings were coming from 2 or 3 distinctive numbers, and after these sorts of writings went on for some days, I couldn't take it any longer. I went to the police, and I too went to induce a modern phone number. I told the cops my entirety circumstance, and they told me that I ought to get an unused number, and they would handle the examination. So I did get a modern number, and after that, I wasn't bothered once more. I moreover never listened anything more approximately those people, who they were or anything. I still ponder why I was getting those ratings. For a small bit of foundation, this happened to me within the 1990s. Amid this time, I was a single female living by myself in a house. I worked a work that was in an office downtown. The company that I worked for back at that point was exceptionally expansive and had distinctive workplaces within the city, and around the one time, there was an enormous work party that was taking place in downtown. It was a lovely, huge bargain, and hundreds of individuals from numerous workplaces were welcomed. When I was there, the primary few hours of it were great. I was blending with other co-workers and a few of my friends from work. Towards the conclusion of the night, in spite of the fact that I was arranging on taking off before long, and a man drew nearer me. I was standing off kind of to the side of small, and he strolled right up and presented himself. I had seen him prior at the party, but I didn't recognize him, and he must have worked at another office. I do not keep in mind what his title was, but he was clearly inquisitive about me. Something around him did not sit right with me. He fair seemed a little bit unusual, and I was moreover not inquisitive about him. We talked for a small bit, fair fundamental discussion. He told me that he worked at another area and inquired me how I preferred my job and stuff. At the conclusion of the discussion, I said that I was arranging on heading out. He asked me on the off chance that I needed to share a cab, and I told him no, much obliged, which I drove there. At that point, he inquired me for my number sometime recently I cleared out. This can be something truly doltish looking back, but back at that point, when a few folks would inquire me for my number and I wasn't interested, I would allow them an off-base number. It was much less demanding to do back at that point, since not everybody had cell phones. I did have a cell phone, but I once in a while utilized it. I would generally fair utilize my domestic phone since my cell phone was huge and bulky. So, I gave this fellow a regular off-base number. At that point, I shook his hand and walked away. After that, I remained at the party for as it were 5 more minutes or so. I said bye to a few of my work companions, and after that I headed out. I cleared out the inn and went to my car, stopped on the road. At that point I drove domestic. I lived as it were around 10 minutes absent, and my house was right exterior of the city. The neighbourhood was exceptionally active, and the houses were truly near together. I went interior, and as it were approximately a diminutive afterward, there was a thump on my front entryway. By presently it was nearly 11 o'clock at night, so I knew this was truly unusual. I strolled over to the entryway and replied it without indeed checking to see who was there. When I opened up the entryway, I saw the fellow from the party. It was a stun to see him here. I inquired him what he was doing, and he appeared lovely irate. He told me that he called my number, and it had a place to a regular fellow who had no thought who I was. At that point, he said that he knew I gave him the off-base number, and inquired me why I did it. There wasn't much I might say. I fair told him I wasn't interested, but that doesn't cruel he may take after me domestic. He said a few more irate things to me, and after that begun up towards my entryway, and looked like he was progressing to attempt to come interior of my house. I rapidly hammered the entryway closed. He caught it right sometime recently it closed in spite of the fact that, and attempted to stop me. I had to essentially toss my entire body up against the entryway to induce it to shut. I was at last able to, and after that I locked it. He attempted opening the entryway a few times and after that started pounding on it. I shouted at him that I was attending to call the police. To begin with, he kept slamming on my entryway. I didn't think anything was getting to halt him, and I went over to the phone. But at long last, he ceased and after that strolled absent. I observed him take off, and after that night, I never saw him once more. I was stressed that he would appear up feasibly at some point or something like that, but he didn't. This was the final time that I ever gave anyone the off-base number. This happened when I was a youngster numerous a long time prior. I was with my best companion, Tony, and we were at my house. My guardians were gone someplace, I do not keep in mind where. Tony and I had been best companions for a long time, and were like brothers. We enjoyed to trick our companions a parcel and things like that. On this night that we were hanging out, Tony had the thought to trick phone call one of our companions. This was back sometime recently. Everyone had smartphones. Cell phones were around, but didn't have the capabilities that they do nowadays. So we were reaching to call our companion Adam, and Tony had an entire joke that he was progressing to say to him. I do not keep in mind precisely what it was, but it was likely truly doltish. So we dialed Adam's number on one of the domestic phones at my house. It rang a couple of times, and after that, who we thought was Adam picked up. Tony began going into his joke and wasn't halting. After he had talked for like a miniature straight, the individual on the other conclusion talked. It was a man, but not Adam. It sounded like a grown-up, and I think we were almost 14. The fellow was truly frantic. I do not review precisely what he said, but he was inquiring us who was calling, what was off base with us, and things like that. When we realized that it wasn't Adam, we were both shocked, conjointly humiliated. Tony Fair hung up the phone, whereas the fellow was still talking. At that point we had a great giggle around it, but chosen not to call Adam any longer. That was sufficient trick phone calls for us. Instead, we chosen to play video recreations. Fair minutes after hanging up, in spite of the fact that the phone began ringing, we did not have caller ID, so I answered it not knowing who was calling us. In spite of the fact that I think we both had a feeling that it may be the fellow who we had fair incidentally dialed. I picked up the phone and replied. I listened the same fellow speaking, and he still sounded irate. I hung up on him, and after that he called once more, right after. This time, in spite of the fact that we did not reply the phone, we began playing video diversions at that point, and over the following 30 minutes or so, the fellow called back a few more times. At slightest we accepted that it was him, but each time we didn't reply and fair let it ring. At that point at last, we didn't get any more calls. We kept on amusement until likely almost an hour after the call. That's when there was a thump at the front entryway. I was confounded when I listened it. I lived in a beautiful normal neighborhood, but thumps on the entryway at night were exceptionally unordinary. We were in my room, and I cleared out the room and strolled out into the living room. I got over to the front entryway and looked out of the window. A few fellow was standing there who I didn't know. He looked right at me as I was looking at him. I moved absent from the entryway, and he thumped once more. I went back to my room and told Tony that a few fellow was there. At that point, the phone rang once more. We were both pondering in the event that there was any possibility that it may well be the same fellow. So we replied the phone call. This time the man talked, and he told us to come exterior. When I listened that, I immediately hung up the phone once more. Presently the man must have been calling from his cell phone. He thumped on the entryway once more, and we both went out into the living room. We listened him shout for us to come exterior. The fellow showed up to be in his 50s, possibly, and was wearing a baseball cap and a coat. That's all I keep in mind around him. We didn't reply the entryway, in spite of the fact that. He remained there for a few more minutes, sometime recently at long last taking off. After that, Tony and I were fair holding up for the phone to ring once more, or for the fellow to come back, but gratefully he never did. After that, we never trick phone called anyone else. I think the fellow that we called must have had caller ID. He might have looked up our address by finding it within the phone book or something. I truly do not know, but that's my best figure. It still creeps me out that he really appeared up at my house. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Midnight Mysteria, for more amazing horror stories.